I'm starting not with a drawing, but with kind of indicating with paint where things lie. For instance, the horizon line, I'm looking at a photo on the side here, the horizon line comes about there, which is kind of nice looking the way it, a little higher, the way it divides the canvas. We could put it anywhere, but I find it's best to either put it a little high or a little low. And then the land curves around like so. And all this is pretty much what's called underpainting. It won't be showing through at the end, but it's just something to get going with. The first step always in painting for me is filling the canvas with paint, because you don't want to get something nice and finished and then have bits of raw white canvas showing through, unless that's what you're going for. But usually if I want something white, I'll paint it white. So I'm filling in relatively, the right colors, blue for the sky, etc., and kind of a grayish blue for the land. But again, all this is going to change as we go. It's much easier to change something after you put it down than to lay the paint down correctly the very first time. I've actually forgotten to put the little point coming out of other land right here. I'm basically using a mixture of phthalo blue, white, and burnt umber to darken it. Burnt umber and phthalo blue or ultramarine blue both make a good neutral mix. When you mix them together, that's where you get kind of this grayish look here. And without adding white, it becomes almost a perfect black. So I'll often use phthalo blue and burnt umber as my black paint. Just going through wherever I see the texture of the canvas peeking through and making sure that's covered up. It's really not so much an artistic part of the process, more of a practical point. Alright, we have a basic idea, and what we are going to put a ship in. A barge might be, or a container ship of some kind. I think it's a barge with a tugboat. I don't know if we've got the angle right here, but it might be slightly more this way. It's coming down this way and going whoop. But again, this isn't in the detail phase. Just darkening up some areas here. In fact, on the photo, some of this turns to almost black. But as it is, my paints are all wet on the canvas, so when I lay down black, it mixes with the gray and defeats the purpose. So this is actually the stage where I'm going to stop recording and let this thing dry a bit. Now, actually, I could go through. No, this is a good place to stop. I was going to say I usually end up messing up the painting at some point, but first I'm going to let this underpainting dry so I have a good beginning to the next stage. And I'll see you in just 1 second. And it's been a little while. Paint's mostly dry. I thought I'd start by showing you what I'm working from. My little laptop, which is covered with paint at this point. That's where I keep my reference photos. And I've got this somewhat good photo. If my screen weren't so paint riddled and glary, it would be even better. But and we're back to the canvas. Make sure we're focused over here. Yeah, good enough. Okay, so I see some little spots here that aren't quite dry, but that's okay. The canvas is mostly dry and it's covered, and that was our goal the first time. Second time here, still got a rather large brush. I'm just going to start refining some of the shapes and areas of the painting here. And actually the whole thing is a little more, the reference photo is a little more purple, gives it a little more moody look. So I'm actually just going to start by going right over it with a wash of red. Just water. And it's, dulling it out too because it's catching a little bit of the underpainting. But again, this is not the finished product. This is the underpainting. I can still see my lines and what I'm working from, so no problem there. I think I'll just add in this red to my phthalo blue so it'll give me both, like so. It's a little dark probably for the sky, but that's okay. Now I've got more of that purpley look. I see in the photo as it gets higher up in this water, it lightens up as the sun catches better on the water. Some of that detail will come at the end, but just getting it closer to where it should be. It's a good idea to work both from the foreground and from the background. So where I originally put this in as a foreground feature, I can refine the shape by working in the background, which also just by virtue of it being more difficult perhaps becomes a more interesting shape usually. In my paintings, I usually don't like to have empty spaces with no texture and no changes in color, so I'll come in and put little splotches of paint here and there, just to add interest. Next, I'm going to darken up the land with some blue and some brown. And in the photo I can see the land, especially in the background, turns into more of a blue color, or perhaps that purple color. It's probably not quite as dark, but it's closer to that than gray. And there's a bit of undulation to the far shoreline there, so I'm trying to capture that. And the darkest of that would be right along here. So I'm adding in more of the brown, the burnt umber, into that blue. To create a more black of color. That made sense. Okay. So darkening that point of land. And I'm laying this in fairly thick. It's always fun to play with the palette knife and come into a thicker place to add a little scratching in some of, it's basically removing bits of paint. Or there may be lights and other details. Usually you don't want to overdo it, but it's a good way to quickly add detail to your painting. You can also come in and outline some things. And there's no paint on this palette knife, I'm just using it to scratch and move the paint around that's already on the canvas. And you can also just as easily take paint onto the knife and add in paint. There's another way to add texture. I've added some lighter paint just to add one of the most important things to remember about acrylic paint, which is what this is it dries fairly quickly, and once dried, your next layer is going to be covering the previous layer. So in other words, be as bold as you want to be or can be, adding in these wherever you want to see how it looks and see how it makes you feel. If it seems like you like that kind of style, then go with it. If you don't, it's quite easy just to paint right over it. Okay, yeah. I'm going to go ahead and add back in this, switch to a smaller brush to add back that barge. Just going to use some black. It's actually a little more thin than what I had before. Trying to be a little more careful, although again, doesn't matter. It can be fixed by cutting into it with the background color to redefine it at a later stage once this is dried. Trying to get the basic shape of it. Close, can't tell. It's good to step back from the painting every once in a while to get an idea of what it looks like from further away. This is just white paint on the brush now, the smaller brush. There's a series of lights that go down here at the bottom. I'm going to add those in, although that's really more of a detail for later, but sometimes it's good to go ahead and add them in to see what they bring to the painting. There's many, this is the city of New Orleans over here, part of it, and so there's actually many buildings over here that I personally can't see from this distance, but looking in, it's really a texture of buildings, all fading into the blue-gray background here. Adding some little bit of touches of green here and there to broaden our palette a bit. Although this particular image does well with very few colors. Here I'm breaking in to this foreground image from the back with using the background color just to define that shape, although it's still wet. I don't want to disturb it too much now. I'll come back and fix it as I need to. Alright, in the far background, horizon line is basically it vanishes right around here, so I need to try to make that transition a little more gradual. It's closer. Alright, I think I'm about ready to let this one dry, this layer dry, so I can go back into it again. I do see a dark line at the edge of this. There's actually two barges when I look closer. Add in the second one here. looking more closely at it, the tugboat actually has an orange paint job. It's very muted, but it's there. So it's something, maybe just a flash of color might do the trick. And I'm also going to add a little more of that same color, just in different places. To add a little unity and color balance. Again, if it doesn't quite work, you can always go back and change something. This coastline. I also see kind of a dark line right on the edge. Always stepping back and reassessing as you go. This a little longer here. Okay, another thing I wanted to add was there is a trailing line coming off that barge and tugboat. It does actually come around. I'm just going to add it in like that and then adjust as needed. Using my finger to kind of take off a little bit of the paint so it's not quite as dark. Catching a little more detail over here. over some of these lights with a more bright white. I'll notice the lights in the background have a slight more orange cast. That's why I've changed colors here. I need more green over here just because I do see that it's grass down in the photo down below. Muted, but it's there, so might as well add that and see how that looks. Too green for me. I can always go back a little more blue, maybe put it back in the shadows a little bit. Leaving it pretty amorphous though, so it doesn't take away from the main star of the show. Alright, taking another look at it. I kind of like all this abstract palette knife work, but this is bothering me a little bit. It's kind of just odd looking, so I'm going to come back in. In the photo it's slightly more pink. So let's try adding some. Might be a little too hot. See what it'll look like if I add a little more of that pink into here. Sometimes the smallest change can make a difference in a painting. And you never know until you try it what's going to work. I suppose if you've done the exact same thing before, then it's more likely to happen again. But I always find myself experimenting as I go. Some things that work in one painting will work in other paintings, and some things, turns out, just don't always work the way you want them to work. That's a little too light. I'm going to add a little more of the red and blue to it. Take out a little bit of that white. Being careful not to catch the white paint, or it'll make smears. Doesn't dry that quick necessarily.